Hello, and welcome to episode 24 of the Her Money, Her Business podcast. Today, I am talking to Jessica Lee. So, Jessica is a writer, an educator, a speaker, and a coach. Having experienced chronic illness twice in her life, Jessica has had to forge her own way, learning how to work smarter, build resilience, manage stress, and create a meaningful and purposeful life. She's a self-confessed nerd, obsessed with how we can use neuroscience, psychology, and well-being principles to help us think, feel, and work better. Jessica writes for Wellbeing magazine and runs her business, The Spark Effect, where she helps people learn how to achieve without burning out, overcome setbacks, live with purpose, and reach their unique potential with more self-kindness. Jessica is also writing her first book, Wired to Thrive, which is out early 2024. So I am excited to share this episode with you today. Jessica has obviously, as her bio says, been through a fair bit in her life with chronic illness. And she really is talking and speaking to the things that she has actually experienced in her business. So she's really using that to help other people. And we're talking a lot about resilience in particular in this episode. And Jessica has lived through that and learnt lots of great tools, not only through what she's been through, but also her business itself, and looking at that, the neuroscience and psychology and well-being principles. She's really got some great things to share for women in business around resilience. So I really love talking to Jessica, and I hope you enjoy this episode as much as I did. Let's get started. You're listening to Her Money, Her Business, a podcast for women starting or growing their own business, and it features episodes about knowing your finances, improving your money confidence, and growing a profitable business that's built to last. If you wish you were good with money, want to feel more confident managing your money, or want to struggle less while making money, then you're in the right place. I'm your host, Sonia Belzarolo, business financials coach, bookkeeper, and champion for women who want to be the master of their own financials. So let's get started. So hi, Jessica. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello, Sonia. Thanks for having me.
Now, do you prefer Jessica or Jess? Because I think I've called you both in our email correspondence.
I don't mind. I think most people call me Jess, but I really don't mind.
Yeah, okay, good. Well, Jess comes more naturally, so we'll go with that.
Okay.
So thank you for being on the podcast and taking some time to have a chat. So, I mean, up until now, the podcast has been very much about money, but it is Her Money, Her Business. So I do want to talk about business topics as well. And on the business side of things, something that I've talked about a lot in season 1 and still like to talk about is women in business being overwhelmed. Financial stress and money confidence is something I'm talking about a lot this season. And so I really love what you're doing in this space. So you've got lots happening. You're writing a book at the moment, which we'll talk about. But also, I think, you've mentioned resilience to me. And I think that would be a really good topic to talk about today. But before we get into all of that, I know we've done the bio at the beginning, the official bio, but do you want to just talk a little bit about what you've been doing and, where you're at right now with your business?
That seems like a simple question, but my life has been a little bit complicated over the last sort of 9 months. I was doing a whole lot of stuff in my business, running courses and doing one-on-one coaching, doing some speaking and writing for magazines. But I got to a point where I was feeling probably a little bit overwhelmed as well by how much needs to happen to get businesses running, and you're the only person in your business. So for me, I wanted to take a step back and do something different. So I actually moved into the corporate space for a little while in a marketing role to utilize the writing skills and marketing and business stuff that I'd learned over, all those years of being in business.
Yeah.
But it was sort of an interesting one for me because my history is that after I finished honours at uni, I got chronic fatigue syndrome after having glandular fever. And it took me 7 years to recover. And so after that is when I started my business. So this was the first time going into a corporate space. And just before I started the role, I got COVID, the week of orientation. And then when I started, I picked up a few more viruses in the office, as often happens. And then I actually got really sick again. So these post-viral complications we're hearing about with long COVID and chronic fatigue syndrome, it happened to me again. And so I managed about 6 months at work before I had to resign because my body could not function. I had reactive arthritis as a result. So couldn't type and all of the rest of it. So for me, it's been about 9 months since I resigned, and it's just been a journey of trying to recover health. And we talk about resilience. It's been a big lesson again in how to not go under, I guess, when these things happen. But it's also re-sparked a real passion for the work I do, because it's reminded me the importance of wellbeing principles, mindset, stress management, balance, all those things. So it's it has had, I guess, some good lessons in it. But for me, moving forward, it's now looking at how I want to create some new things in my business and how I might like to work with people and hopefully bring that extra level of insights and wisdom and research that I've been doing in this space. So
Wow, that has been a journey.
Yes.
And I mean, I had known of your story with chronic fatigue prior to that, because we've known each other online for a few years now. So I knew of that initial one, but then getting it again when you were already, I know you were in your corporate career or you'd made that transition, but prior to that, you were already in that wellness space and you know, talking about all the neuroscience and the psychology behind all of that. And then to personally go through that again, that's a big learning curve, I guess, for you to have to go through all of that again. But I'm sure that you had skills that you could draw on because you were, you know, I would say an expert in that sort of area of things.
Absolutely. You know, I'm incredibly glad that I've now got a massive toolkit that I use regularly to just fall back on. And last time I went through this, I experienced a lot of anxiety because I didn't have any of this understanding. So this time I haven't experienced anxiety because I've got great things in place, but struggling to understand purpose and meaning, which we'll talk about later in resilience, has been a big challenge for me because I felt like I learned so much the first time round. It's like, why is this happening again? But like I said, I'm starting to understand what could be gained from going through this a second time. But the second time round as a mum and as a wife and being a bit older, like what I'm a few years off 40, is very different from the first time when I was in my 20s. And it's been a lot harder, if I'm completely honest. It's been very, very hard because there's that sense of, you know, time's running out. But I think in some senses, a lot of us can relate to this idea of things changing or feeling like life doesn't go to plan, having demands on us and looking at, you know, we feel like we're getting older and, you know, what the future holds and what decisions we want to make. So, you know, I know that what I'm going through is probably a more extreme version, but other people are really grappling with very similar challenges in their life. So,
And I mean, I can imagine that first time around, you know, you've come out of studying and you probably just got yourself to think about and get through. Whereas second time around, particularly being a mum and having, you know, your children don't necessarily understand, you know, that level of sickness, having to, you know, sort of go through that when there's other people in the picture as well. So how do you think resilience played into that this time around?
Well, I think the last time that I went through this and through the 10 so years of being like a wellbeing journalist, I've done a lot of study and had to do a lot of trial and error. And I've sort of come up with these 4 steps that we can go through to be more resilient, which we can talk about later. But the first one is about being real. The second one is about reframing. The third is re-navigating. And the last is re-energizing. But I think what I would say for me this time, the reframing, which is about creating meaning and purpose from a difficult experience or adversity or just disappointment, is so essential. And because I've struggled a bit more with that this time, I've noticed that instead of becoming anxious, I've become more depressed. When we talk about mental health, for me, if I don't feel like my life has that bigger plan, that I'm working towards something, that I can do the things that matter to me, when the energy's not there, like, you know, sometimes I'm just in bed, I can't even read or watch television. So my life is very small on those days. So it's probably made me more aware of how crucial being able to attach purpose and meaning to difficult times is to resilience. Because when we don't have that, we start to feel hopeless. We start to feel overwhelmed, and we start to feel stressed. And that has then a whole cascade effect on how our body reacts, how we feel, and how we think. So that's been a massive learning. And I've had to, I guess, dig a lot deeper. I've talked about in the past empowered acceptance, the power of accepting things we can't always control and change. And I would have to say I've been resisting acceptance for a while, because I'm like, I cannot believe this has happened again. But I think I'm coming around to that place of going, okay, when we resist what is, we stay stuck. We really do. But in honor of being real, sometimes we can't just jump to acceptance, because it's painful. There's grief and loss there. Yeah. And I often say to people, like, I feel like I'm in a game of like snakes and ladders, and I was just about to win, and I'm being put right back to the beginning. And that's the best way I can describe it.
Yes.
So, yeah.
And I think a lot of people, in talking about the overwhelm and the stress, etc., a lot of people would probably go straight to the mindset part of things, which is very important. But I think the acceptance obviously is key, but also the physical reaction of your body, I think, is something that is not necessarily the first thing that people think about. So can you tell me a little bit more about that and how that affects things? Obviously, you're going through an illness, but the reaction of the body and how you're reacting to stress levels and things, how does that all work?
Yeah, look, I find I'm absolutely fascinated by the stress response in the body. I find it, and the brain, I find it fascinating because it's there to protect us, but it can also create a lot of problems. But one thing I've learned is I'm very much a thinking type person, and a lot of us are. When we go through difficult times, we want to jump to solutions. But when we understand how our brain works, is that when we are in a position where we feel threatened in any way, and I'm not talking necessarily physically, because a lot of our stresses come from social, emotional types of things. So if we feel like our life is not as we want it to be, there's a level of threat and risk and fear. So when we move into that fight or flight response, there is a real change in our brain. So within that emotional part of our brain, which is one part of that is called the amygdala, and it's part of our fear response that kicks off the fight or flight response. And then the other part, which our prefrontal cortex, is that sort of logical, critical thinking, calm and rational part of our brain that we generally want to think from. But when we're in that heightened place of stress and anxiety, we're thinking from the amygdala. So what we need to be able to do is actually regulate our nervous system, which is through our body, through breathing and movement and exercise and relaxation and things that bring us joy, to communicate to our brain that we are safe. And that then allows us to fire up the prefrontal cortex so we can think about solutions and ways forward and reframing our thinking. But when we try to jump to that first, it's usually fairly ineffective because we're not able to, our brain's not there. So that's a huge learning that I've come to see over the years, is that we have to first change our body before we can change our mind. And that's where these embodied practices of breathing and even cold therapy and yoga and stretching and movement and exercise and dance and all of those things help to switch off that stress response so we can see the bigger picture. Because the other problem is, when we're in that state of mind, we're in survival mode and our attention focuses in and becomes very narrow, and we can't see the big picture. So we make very reactive decisions, very emotional, fear-driven. And I think we can see that in business when we become a bit frantic and we just become reactive, and we look back and think, oh, why did I think that was a good idea? So I think, there's this idea that when we know we're highly stressed, we need to intervene. But there's also a thing called stress resilience, where when we have practices and habits in our life that we do regularly, it helps us to not become as stressed and reactive. So it's sort of like this, band-aid solution versus like a more holistic way of supporting ourselves through whatever happens. And I think that's a really important thing to differentiate as well.
And I like, that idea of stress resilience. That sounds to me like something that's not necessarily thought about, but obviously very important. So the 4 areas that you talk about are your 4-step process to responding resiliently to setbacks. So do you want to talk into a little bit more detail about those?
Yeah, sure. So I might just talk about one at each time. We can just have a chat after. But the first one is about being real. I think the biggest problem in our culture is this idea that we just need to soldier on, push through, deny how we are, and this sense that being honest and vulnerable means that we're weak, not strong enough. And that's a big issue in the business space. I've definitely seen that. You know, how are you? Oh, I'm fine. Everything's great. Business is wonderful. When in actual fact, maybe not.
Yes.
I've sort of learned that the first step needs to be real. Now, this can be being real with yourself only, or it may mean actually being real with those in your life if it's actually becoming an issue. So it's totally fine and actually a good thing to go, this sucks. This is hard. I am so angry, or I'm disappointed, or I'm frustrated. But being willing to just sit in that space of realness, because if we don't let that happen, we're suppressing things. And I think we all know enough about mental health and wellness that doesn't really lead anywhere very productive or supportive. So I personally found this so important when I became a mum for the first time. I have a little guy who's 6 now. He's not so little. But it was a very overwhelming transition into motherhood. I found it, also having sort of come off the back of illness. But I remember like just sitting on the bathroom floor and crying, going, how am I going to do this? But what I noticed was it was in that moment of actually acknowledging this is really hard and I'm probably not coping as well as I could, and crying. That unraveling actually allowed me to rebuild and rise up again. So it creates this spaciousness that we need in order to actually think differently and find solutions and reach out. So that's the first one, is actually saying it's okay and it's necessary to be real.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think, to me, in talking about that or listening to you talking about that, motherhood and business can be very similar in that aspect. Like you were saying, you're in business, everything's fine. It's the same thing, isn't it? Motherhood, everything's fine. Yes, it's wonderful. But in actual fact, behind the scenes, it's really not that fantastic some days. And I really struggled. I mean, I definitely, still have moments. I'm sure, we will until they leave home at the age of 30 or whatever that may be. I have a 8 and a 9-year-old. And so there's definitely, days, that you just think, what am I doing here? What's going on? And learning to be real about that side of things is definitely a struggle. But from a business point of view, I was in a corporate career for 22 plus years before I started my own business, which I've been doing for 7 years now. But that transition for the first few years was that realness was something that is just not in the corporate world. It's very much everything's fantastic, as an image to uphold, all that sort of thing. So coming into running your own business and learning to be real and be realistic, and you don't have to have this image of the corporate world, that was a real learning curve. But once you make it through that, and you can be real in your business, with yourself and with your customers and with the world at large, it's freeing. And so what's the next step?
So the next step is then to reframe, and this is about understanding that we can't always control what happens in our life. And when I was at university, I did an honours degree on the role of hope in the lives of refugees. And I came across some beautiful writing by a few different authors. And one of those was Dr. Viktor Frankl and his book, Man's Search for Meaning. And he has so many beautiful quotes, and he draws from his experience of being actually a survivor of the Nazi concentration camps. But he says that, all freedoms can be taken, like everything can be taken from you, but the last of human freedoms, which is to choose your own way, which is to choose your response. And that, Nietzsche says, he who has a why can bear almost anyhow. And I think that there's a lot of truth in that, because there are a lot of things that happen in our life and business that are out of our control. In business, we can work exceptionally hard and not get the result that we thought or wanted or expected or was promised to us or whatever it might be. And so in order to be able to move forward and not get stuck, in the realness that we were talking about is actually to go up a level and look at what can be gained from this difficult experience or emotions or things like that. So an example would be, in my business, my model, I was doing group online courses, so group coaching. So I had a model where I would launch all the time, or a few times a year, I should say. It wasn't an evergreen. And launches are exhausting. They are very difficult. And you put in your whole heart and soul because you believe in what you're doing and you want to help people. So in the early days, when I wouldn't get as many signups as I'd hoped, it was very, very disheartening. And you think, what am I doing this for? So an example of reframing in this sort of business sense was actually, one thing I did was go, okay, there's less people in this group program. So what's the upside of this? What's the learning? What's the silver lining? And I was able to say, okay, it's not what I wanted, I'm disappointed, but this means that while I'm learning, I can do it in front of a smaller audience. I can iron out the problems. I can also give a more one-on-one experience to the clients, and they will then have a better transformation, and that can help then with referrals and things like that. And so for me, whenever I hit that difficult place of disappointment or any of that, is to say, all right, so what's the purpose and meaning? What can I create? Some people think things happen for a reason, but if you don't believe that, the other belief is I choose to create that purpose and that meaning. So same with me with illness. The first time round, it was like, okay, I'm going to learn about how we need to think and work and live differently. And I'm going to share that, and I'm going to incorporate my experiences with that. And then this time round, it's like, well, I'm writing a book, and going through this a second time has allowed my work to get more gritty, to get more real. And so I see that as a potential purpose. So looking at what, in 5 years' time, looking back, what can I think about this experience? How can I leverage this? What can I learn? What's the personal growth opportunity? Because I think when we don't have that layer, like I was saying before, there's that level of overwhelm, pointlessness, hopelessness that does keep us stuck and stops us from feeling optimism and stops us from actually being able to move on and start to problem solve with an innovative, optimistic mind.
Yes, definitely having that opportunity to create optimism from any situation. I mean, there's lots of, people who talk about that everything is a lesson. So there's no loss, there's no negatives, everything is going to be a lesson. Yeah, and I really believe in that as well. I think that reframe is absolutely important. And I think that as women in business, a lot of times we can definitely miss the opportunity to reframe.
Yeah. And I think this is where, in the reframe section of resilience, is understanding your business and life purpose and values is actually really important. For me, when I've taken risks that may not have worked, if those risks were aligned to my core values and purpose, I think, okay, it didn't work out, but I was able to actively live that in my life. And there's value in that in terms of wanting to live an authentic, aligned life. So I think you're also having a clear sense of, I guess, your purpose in life and business can help you to reframe with a bit more ease. I wouldn't say that step is at all easy. I think it's easy to feel like, oh, yes, we just reframe. And there's sometimes when it is. But if you're coming off the back of a lot of disappointments or multiple areas of your life, it isn't easy. But I would just say the flip side of that, what does that look like? What does that feel like? And that's not a good place to be.
And so step 3, once we've moved through reframing.
Yep. So step 3 is about re-navigating. And this is really about solutions, is looking at what's the next step forward. Because when we don't feel there are solutions to our problems, that also really impacts our mental well-being of feeling, again, stressed and overwhelmed, anxious, depressed, things like that. So this is where we want to look at the situation we're in and say, well, what can I do? So another quote I love that I read when I was sick as well was by tennis star Arthur Ashe, and you may have heard it, but he says, start where you are, use what you have, and do what you can. And I love this because it's accessible to everybody, no matter what's going on. And so instead of focusing, which when we get distressed, we often focus on what we can't do, what we don't have, what didn't happen, our limitations, all of that.
Yeah.
And coming back to business, there are tons of limitations, especially as a small business owner. We're not working with a huge amount of abundance and a 20-person marketing team. And so, so I think coming back and going, okay, so this is what's happened. What is the next small step that I can do to move this forward? And this is not just about moving forward. This is about also reconnecting with our own agency, that we can have an influence over our future and our life moving forward. It's so important. So looking at what skills do you have? Do you have skills you can draw on? Even looking back at difficult times, you know, have you come through difficult times? Can you use what you've learned the last time and apply it this time? Who do you know? Who can you reach out to? Maybe you actually need to upskill. So let's say you've done a launch and it hasn't gone particularly well. You might have pinpointed that your Facebook ads weren't effective. And you might realize, well, actually, I need to learn Facebook ads, or I need to bring somebody in. But this is the time to actually get tangible, because when we do have that tangible, it does help us to feel more in control. And it's so important in life to feel like we have a level of control on parts of our life where there is that controllable sliding scale. So, but I would say as well that we often think that we need to make big changes and big steps to create transformation. And I think there's a time and place for that. But I think for most of us, more often, the power lies in those small steps. And this is where when I work with clients, I teach them more around body awareness and about finding that sweet spot of challenge. Because if we feel overwhelmed and over challenged and too stressed, we move into that anxiety, can't really think and work. And that's not great. If we're under challenged and under sort of inspired, we also don't do much. So it's finding that middle ground. So when we look at those re-navigation steps, it's about feeling what that feels like. Does it feel good? Does it feel doable? Even a little bit scary is okay, but not too much. And then upping or downing, like scaling up, scaling down with your steps, you know. Really identifying that next small step to help you feel like you can move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's really good. Before I had my current business, I had trained as a K's and Muse creativity coach, which is basically helping people with their creativity, but from small steps. So Kaizen in Japanese is small steps. And it's that process of just starting small and, you know, building on that and getting that motivation from that small change, and small changes lead to big changes. Yeah, so I love that. That's, you know, absolutely small steps are where it's at. Taking anything too big, like you say, it just adds to your overwhelm.
Definitely. And I am all for, I guess, rewiring our concept about living and working for the idea around sustainable success, because I see in business and corporate this push to do more and faster, and it does lead to burnout. And also, when we understand how our brain works, pushing ourselves so hard actually makes our brain not work as well. So we're not actually doing our best work. We're usually a bit inefficient, making mistakes, not coming up with the most creative out-of-the-box thinking. So yes, we're hitting those goals, but the question is, could we be doing better and more quality?
That's so true. And for women who are in business and have come from that corporate background, you know, again, I would use that example of myself, the first few years of my business, and I had babies at that point, trying to do everything all at once because I was used to working, you know, long hours and getting a lot done in a small amount of time. Just trying to do that in the beginning was absolutely exhausting. Definitely, you know, trying to not take that tact and, like you say, having that quality work over the quantity. So step number 4.
So step number 4 is about re-energizing. So over the time, I've realized that all of these previous steps, they're very difficult to do if you're exhausted. So when we're tired, again, the emotional brain is in control. And you know that. We all know that when we're sleep deprived, we become very emotional, reactive. You see little kids when they're tired, they're exactly the same. And so what we need to do if we want to move forward with resilience is actually be really mindful about self-care and about what we need to do to re-energize. So again, in business, if there was times when I would hit a difficult place, is that I would often say, all right, I'm not going to work on anything today. I'm just going to go to the beach and sit with a coffee and a book and just let it go for a bit. Now, I know not everyone can do that, but maybe it's an hour coffee in the sun or something like that. But we need to make sure we have the energy in order to be able to follow through on these steps, to think clearly, to feel confident, to have the energy to actually action those small steps that we've actually seen. And the catch with this, though, is that when things are not going particularly well in business, it's these very self-care routines and habits that are usually the first thing we throw out the window. So we go, oh, I can't go to the gym today. Oh, I'll postpone meeting up with my friend because I've got too much to do. I'll go to bed an hour or two later. And on one level, there's like a logic to that, because we believe that view that in order to get better results, we need to work harder and longer. But we need to really unlearn that sort of mentality. And there's something I'm really passionate about, because it's those very things that allow us to be resilient in our business when we face tough times. And like I was saying before, it's those things that allow us to build our stress resilience just generally. And we need that in business and life. You know, we don't want to wait till we've hit rock bottom to then learn how to meditate or learn what we need to feel calm and reset. And this is where body awareness and a little bit of like intuition is really important. So, you know, once or twice a year, I take myself away for a few nights just on my own, because I just want quiet. I don't really talk to anybody. I call home maybe once. Where other people, it might be like, oh, for me to re-energize, I need to go to a big music concert or like whatever it might be. But when we know ourselves, that can really help. And I think as a business owner, there's often no one watching us to say, you're doing too much, you're working too long. I think in the
except
corporate
maybe
space,
kids.
Yes, kids are good like kids are good like that, aren't they?
You know, like my daughter said to me the other day, clearly I'm obviously working too much last week. She said to me, can you have a chat to your boss and let her know that she's working too much? I said, you mean have a chat to myself? She said, yes.
Oh, I love that. Bless. I love that.
Yes, but you're right. There's nobody else around telling us.
And that's where I think having habits where, particularly if you work from home, where it takes you out of home. So it could be, you know, you go to a book club once a month, or you have a certain gym class that you do, or a yoga class or something. And I think if you've paid money for those things, the better, because we're like, can't miss it, put the money down. Where if we just let ourselves go, oh, I'll go to the gym at some point, we probably won't. So making sure that within our week or within our month, that there's moments where we're like, I guess, refilling that tank is important, so that when we get to those difficult times, we've got the support structures already there. But I think also, like, around re-energizing, there's that need to change our mindset, because this idea of slowing down, enjoying rest and downtime, we come up against a lot of our own internal conditioning. That rest is lazy, rest is unproductive, sleep is for when we're dead. I've heard that a few times. Or that, you know, doing things that are playful and joyful is like what we did when we were kids. Reminding ourselves with like a mindset anchor that when I take the time out, I come back as my best. Or by doing less, I can actually do more, or all of those sorts of things. Because it's hard to feel okay about something that we're sort of told really in society is not the way forward. I think that's changing, though. I think we're starting to get a bit more aware. Thank goodness.
I do see a lot more people, particularly in the online space, and women, you know, who are leaders in the online space, let's say, talking a lot more about that sort of thing. So, you know, taking some time out, figuring out what it is, like you said, that works for you. What is it that recharges you, and understanding that about yourself, and then actually scheduling it into your calendar. So when you're mapping out your week or your month, putting that in there, and that is mapped out as your time. It's like any other appointment in your calendar.
Which I think can be a real challenge, particularly for women, because a lot of guilt comes up, especially if you're a parent, because like I said, for me, knowing that going away on my own is a really important way to just calm the nervous system down and have that time and spaciousness. But it's not without the challenge of going, oh, can I do that? So I would say that as we learn what we need, there's that next step of actually feeling okay and owning that without all the guilt surrounding our needs, because we often are quite good at putting other people's needs before our own. So there's a big learning around that too, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that guilty part as a mum never goes away. And so for me, I deal with that by just thinking, well, yes, I do feel guilty, but that's actually okay. I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to feel it and it's going to happen. So I've just accepted that. I'll feel guilty, but I'm going to do whatever that thing is.
It's so important. And in terms of guilt, I actually read recently a really great book by Gabor Mate. I think that's how you pronounce his name. It's the book called When the Body Says No, and it looks at the hidden impact of stress. And part of that is when we don't say no to things and we're always yes, yes, yes to everybody, that it creates internal stress, which can lead to illness and disease. It's a very interesting book. But he was actually made the comment that if you know you're a people pleaser who struggles to say no, that guilt is a really good thing to feel, because it's an indication that you are actually valuing your needs and things like that. So I really liked that, because we often think, oh, I feel guilty, that means I shouldn't do it. If you know it's something you need and that you often put other people before, it's a sign that you are onto the right thing.
Yes, I like that. That's good. Yeah, I'm also fascinated by what are the true effects of stress on the body that we don't see, because that's the thing as well, is you can keep going and going and going, but you're not necessarily understanding what's going underneath, what's going on underneath. It's very easy to ignore, I think, physical symptoms and signals, if you like. But they're obviously there, and there is no avoiding something is going to happen if you continue to allow yourself to be stressed.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, we see the emergence of things like autoimmune conditions and things like that. They're sort of on the rise as well. And I think we've become incredibly disconnected from our bodies in Western culture. It's very top heavy with our brain, And I know so many people who are stressed but don't know that they are, or the age-old one of I thrive on stress. And I find this really interesting, because I used to be like this. I used to love that adrenaline and the excitement, but now that I understand the body and brain changes and how much it's really taxing on our body to be in fight or flight, even if we're excited by that. It has, we get more glucose in our system. So there's that issue of diabetes and like this whole lot of things. Actually going, we might enjoy it, but it might not be good for us. And that's a real challenge. And when you're young and you feel invincible, you just, like I used to burn the candle at both ends all the time. And I will be honest to say that I did enjoy it and I achieved great things, but not particularly wise in hindsight.
Yes, and not sustainable. And, at the end of the day, we don't know everything physiologically about what these things are doing. Like, I'm sure there's obviously a lot more studies these days than there were when we were younger about this sort of thing, but there's still a lot of mysteries around, what's going to, and in 20 years, there's something just going to pop up and, we don't put that necessarily to the stress that happened 20 years ago that we put our bodies through, but, it might happen. So, yes, the preventative stuff obviously is important to have a look at. And I think those are really good steps. I mean, we're talking about resilience here, but all of those things that you've talked about are everyday tips, really. Whether you're a business owner or whether you're listening to this just as a person who's stressed. So before we wrap up, tell me about your book that you're writing and when that's coming out and what's it about and all that sort of stuff.
So it's very much about the sorts of things we've been talking about. So it's called Wired to Thrive. Hopefully it will be out in early new year. I keep finding more and more things to put in it, so I have to draw a line somewhere. But it's broken up into 3 sections. The first is around purpose, so doing the things that matter to us and living a value-aligned life. The second is on pacing, so looking at how do we actually achieve without burning out. And the third is potential. So how do we actually step into what we know we're capable of, but with more ease and less self-doubt? So a lot of this, my book is really designed for people who are looking for, I guess, an easier path. They've been on that hustle and they're feeling exhausted and they're thinking there has to be an easier way. They're feeling maybe unfulfilled with where life is at, based on the shoulds, not so much the things that are calling to them or that are value aligned. So my book is looking at, what does our brain and body need to actually thrive? And this was the question I asked when I first got sick. So this book is a culmination of the last 12 years of research and lived experience and interviews with people that I've met to actually answer that question. And what I've discovered writing it is that the answer to that question is actually a whole lot of unlearning, like I was saying before, about what we believe leads to a productive, successful, healthy, happy life. And so, and predominantly it's looking at how do we have a better life, but by being kinder to ourselves and our body. So I'm really, really excited to share it. It's based in science, because I think it's incredibly important we understand some of the science behind this, because to say just manage your stress is one thing, but to really map out how it affects us is another. And it equips us with that awareness of things. And the fact that we can change our brain, we can rewire through neuroplasticity, gives us huge amounts of hope that we don't have to stay the same. So there's heaps of practical strategies to help people to really to think, live, and to work better.
That sounds exciting. It sounds exactly like the type of book I'd want to read.
Oh, good.
I'm ready.
Excellent. I love to hear that.
No, that's really good. I love all that stuff like you. I love the medical and the science stuff behind all of this. I think that's the missing link with people really getting what this is all about and why it's so important. So that sounds great. Can't wait to read it. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for coming on and talking today about resilience. I think there's some great tools and tips in there, and just, general information that people can use, that women in business need, I think, to be thinking about. So I'll put the links to all your socials, etc., and your website into the show notes. But is there anywhere in particular, or if anyone wants to reach out to you, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, so email is jessica@thesparkeffect with an e.com.au. If you go to my website, thesparkeffect.com.au, there's a few resources. One is a guide to beat overwhelm, which could be a perfect link through. And that then also puts you on my email list. I email probably fortnightly with different things. You can join the book community for the release of my book and get a free chapter and some extra little bonuses. I think the free chapter is about building body awareness, a good place to start. And reach out on socials. I love connecting with people, and if there's any questions or anything that's come up from this, definitely ask.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, that's been a great chat. Thank you so much again for coming on, and I look forward to reading your book when it's out.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
No worries. Thanks, Jess. This episode was brought to you by my mini course, Money In, Money Out. Head over to our website, blossomingbusiness.com.au, for this episode's show notes found under podcasts. And if you're interested, jump on the Money In, Money Out waitlist to find out when it's next available. You've been listening to the Her Money, Her Business podcast with me, Sonia Belzarolo. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review over on iTunes. It really does help to get the podcast out to more people. And of course, I love hearing your feedback. Thanks for listening. And here's to knowing your finances and growing your business. It's your money, your business.